The Copa Room wasn't the only place in Las Vegas where history got made. Sometimes it happened on the casino floor, between the felt tables and the floating cigarette smoke and the sound of jazz bleeding through the walls like something half alive. On the night of November 3rd, 1963, the main gaming hall of the Sand Hotel was exactly that kind of place. The kind where fortunes collapsed quietly and reputations died without a sound. The camera, if there had been one where the film it ran on, would have opened wide on that room. It would have swept across the crystal glasses, catching chandelier light like scattered stars, across the dealers in their immaculate white shirts, moving cards with the indifference of men who had seen everything twice. It would have floated past the roulette wheel spinning its red and black gospel, past the craps table where a man in a cream tuxedo was either winning big or pretending to, and then it would have found her. Judy Garland sat at the main blackjack table near the center of the room, and she looked like a woman who had survived something that would have killed anyone else. Her dress was deep crimson, sequined and luminous under the chandeliers, catching the light the way only certain things do, the way broken glass catches it, beautiful and sharp at the same moment. She was pale, she was elegant, and she was losing, though not at cards. She'd been in Vegas for 3 days on a booking. She almost canceled twice. Her voice was back, more or less. Her nerves were held together by something finer than she'd like to admit. She wasn't gambling for the thrill of it. She was gambling the way some people drink coffee, just to have something to do with her hands, just to feel the weight of a normal evening, just to sit somewhere bright and loud and not think about everything that came before. The hand she was playing was 11 against the dealer's 6, a favorable position by any measure. She tapped the felt with 2 fingers. The dealer laid a 10. 21. The chip slid toward her. She didn't smile. That was when Marco Rinaldi walked in. He entered from the east corridor, the one that connected the private gaming rooms to the main floor, and he walked the way men walk when they believe the floor was built specifically for their footsteps. He was broad-shouldered, silver-templed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's mortgages. He had the particular kind of handsome that curdled at close range, the kind that worked perfectly from 20 feet away and revealed itself as something colder up close. He had 2 men with him who didn't look like companions. They looked like furniture that could follow instructions. Rinaldi was not simply a high roller. He was a man with interests in shipping, in political campaigns, in certain arrangements that existed at the edges of legal language. He was the sort of man who was never technically in the room when things happened, yet always seemed to have been the reason they did. He had been in Las Vegas for 4 days, and in those 4 days he had moved quietly and purposefully through every room that mattered, looking for something that was not his and had not been offered. He spotted Judy the moment he entered. He took a seat 2 positions down the table, ordered scotch without looking at the waitress who brought it, and began to play. For a while he simply played cards. The table shifted around his presence the way water shifts around something dropped into it. A brief disruption, then the illusion of calm. Then he began to talk. It started quietly, a comment to a companion, delivered at a volume carefully calibrated to carry just far enough. Bad luck at a table spreads, you know? Some people carry it in with them. His companion laughed on cue. A woman across the table shifted uncomfortably and studied her cards. Judy knew he was talking about her. She had been talked about in precisely this manner, at precisely this volume, by precisely this type of man, more times than she could count across a career that had taken her to every kind of room. She said nothing. She tapped the felt. She played her hand. Rinaldi grew bolder. They say she hasn't had a real engagement in months, he murmured. They say the voice is going. Another laugh from a companion. One of the other players excused himself and took his chips to another table. Judy set her cards down very carefully. The way you set something down when you're concerned about what your hands might do if they stay empty. She looked at the dealer. "Color me up," she said quietly. She began to stand. That was when Rinaldi's hand closed around her wrist. Not gently. Not the way a man reaches for a woman's hand to help her from a chair. He grabbed her wrist the way you grab a door handle, with complete disregard for what the door might be feeling. He pulled her back down toward the table, and when she resisted, when she pulled away and turned to face him with an expression that was fury barely contained inside the thinnest possible shell composure, he raised his hand. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The difference matters. Quiet is what happens between sounds. Silent is what happens when every person in a room stops breathing at the same moment, because something is about to occur that cannot be taken back. 2,000 square feet of casino floor went silent in the time it takes a man to raise his arm. The blow landed. Not a slap, a punch. Open palm, but thrown with the full weight of a man who had never once in his life considered consequences. It caught Judy across the left cheek, snapped her head to the side, and sent her stumbling back into the dealer's station. Chips scattered. A glass fell. The sound it made hitting the floor was the loudest thing in the room. Judy caught herself on the edge of the table. She did not fall. She straightened up slowly, one hand pressed to her face, and she looked at Rinaldi with an expression that had gone somewhere beyond anger, somewhere ancient and very still. Rinaldi smoothed his jacket. "Next time," he said, "don't bring your bad luck to my table." And from across the room, leaning against the far wall with a cigarette burning between two fingers and an expression of complete and terrifying calm, Dean Martin watched every second of it. Chapter 2. The Lockdown. Dean didn't move immediately. That was the thing people would remember later when they told the story. That he didn't rush. He finished drawing on the cigarette. He exhaled slowly. He handed the glass in his other hand to the nearest cocktail waitress with the unhurried courtesy of a man who had nowhere better to be. And then he walked. He walked the way he always walked, loose-limbed and easy, like a man taking a stroll through a garden he happened to own. But his eyes, which could be warm enough to melt iron on a stage, were something else entirely now. They were flat and focused and absolutely without mercy. He stopped 6 feet short of Rinaldi and spoke 2 words to the man standing nearest the eastern corridor. Just 2 words, spoken at normal conversational volume, with no particular urgency. "Lock it." The man moved without hesitation. Within 90 seconds, every exit on the main floor had a body standing in front of it. Not aggressively, not obviously, just present in a way that communicated, clearly and without ambiguity, that this particular evening was not yet finished. Rinaldi became aware of this gradually, the way a man becomes aware of weather changing. First, a sense that something had shifted in the atmosphere. Then the specific, uncomfortable realization that the doors were no longer accessible in the casual way doors usually are. By the time he registered the full geometry of his situation, Dean was standing in front of him. "Mr. Rinaldi," Dean said. His voice was conversational, warm, even, "I wonder if I could have a moment of your time." Rinaldi looked at Dean the way powerful men look at obstacles, with the automatic calculation of a man deciding how difficult removal will be. "I know who you are," Rinaldi said. "I'd be worried if you didn't," Dean replied pleasantly. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. The particular quality of its delivery, the absolute absence of any interrogative inflection, the way it landed in the air as simple established fact, made it clear that it wasn't a request. Rinaldi's 2 companions started to rise. Dean glanced at them once, briefly, and they sat back down with the quiet efficiency of men who had correctly read a situation. But before Rinaldi stood, something else was already in motion. Because what Rinaldi didn't know, what hadn't been told, what the people who sent it had failed to discover, was that Judy Garland had not been sitting at that blackjack table by accident. 3 hours earlier, in the second-floor ladies' lounge, a woman Judy had never met before had pressed a gold cigarette lighter into her hand without a word and walked out. Judy had examined it in the privacy of a stall. Inside the lighter's base, rolled tighter than a cigarette paper, was a strip of microfilm no longer than her thumbnail. On that microfilm were names. 14 names. Senators, a state attorney general, 3 federal judges, and various men of influence who had been accepting payments from a specific Chicago organization in exchange for very specific favors. Rinaldi had not punched Judy Garland because he was angry about cards. He had punched her to create chaos, to scatter the people around her, to cause enough disruption in the 12 seconds of confusion that his companion, the quieter one, the one nobody was watching, could reach into her purse and retrieve the lighter before she delivered it to the man she'd come to meet. The man she'd come to meet was Dean Martin. The companion's hand had been inside her bag when the blow landed. In the subsequent confusion, He'd withdrawn it. Successfully, he believed. What he had not accounted for was that Judy Garland, in the moment before she reached the table, had moved a lighter from her purse to the inside of her left glove. The microfilm was still with her. But now things had accelerated beyond a plan anyone had made, and somewhere beneath the glittering surface of the Sands Hotel's main floor, the real game was only beginning. Chapter 3. Cat and Mouse in the Basement. They moved Judy through a door behind the bar that most guests didn't know existed, down a service corridor lit by bare bulbs, and into the underground network that connected the Sands to its own operational reality. Every grand hotel in Las Vegas had this. The hidden circulatory system, the place where the illusion was manufactured and maintained. Down here, there were no chandeliers. There were industrial pipes and bare concrete walls, and the smell of industrial cleaner and hot metal from the laundry rooms. There were massive kitchen facilities where 50 people worked in organized chaos, producing the elegance that appeared mysteriously and immaculately upstairs. There were corridors worn smooth by a decade of employee footsteps, and there were stairwells and storage rooms, and the particular, unglamorous truth of how glamour gets made. Judy had been escorted down by a young man named Eddie who worked security, and had the look of someone who had been briefed exactly as much as he needed to be. He told her to wait in the linen storage room. He told her someone would come. He left. For approximately 4 minutes, Judy was alone in a room full of folded white sheets, listening to the sound of the hotel digesting itself around her. Then the door at the far end of the corridor opened, and 2 of Rinaldi's men came through it. They had clearly expected to find someone else. They found Judy Garland standing between shelving units with the composed expression of a woman who performed on Broadway, in Hollywood, at the Palace Theater, and who therefore did not consider 2 men in a linen closet to constitute a genuine threat to her equilibrium. Miss Garland, the first one, said, reaching for her arm, "Don't," she said, and something in the way she said it, not loud, not frightened, just completely certain, made him pause for a half second. A half second was all she needed. She turned, moved through the shelving unit's far end into the connecting laundry corridor, and walked briskly toward the sound of machinery, not running, walking fast, with purpose, in a way that in a corridor full of employees moving at the same pace did not immediately distinguish her as someone being pursued. She took off the crimson evening jacket and draped it over her arm, reducing her profile against the red that had made her visible. She found a linen cart and pushed it ahead of her with the practiced air of someone who belonged. The 2 men emerged from the corridor behind her and scanned the room. 40 employees. Movement everywhere. The woman they were looking for was indistinguishable, for the moment, from the rest of the working world. Judy navigated by memory and instinct through 3 corridors, up a service staircase, and into the corridor outside the counting room on the 2nd floor, exactly where, though she didn't yet know it, Dean needed her to be. What happened next was not luck. It only looked like luck. The best plans always do. Chapter 4. The Betrayal Within. His name was Carl Brewer. He had worked security at the Sands for 8 years. He and Dean Martin had played cards together on slow Tuesday nights. He had been to Dean's home for Christmas dinner. He had received birthday telegrams, invitations, the easy warmth of a man who remembered everyone. He had also, for the past 14 months, been passing information to the Chicago outfit, specifically to the organization whose interests Rinaldi represented. When Rinaldi had arrived 4 days ago, Carl had done 3 things. He had disabled the secondary mirror relay surveillance system that covered the East Corridor and the 2nd floor counting room. He had provided a layout of the service tunnels. And he had arranged for certain doors that should be locked to be unlocked at certain times. He had done all of this because he owed money he couldn't repay and had been offered a way out that required only small compromises, each of which led naturally to the next. He did not know that Dean Martin knew. Dean had known for 11 days. He had known since a phone call from a contact in Chicago who owed him a favor older than the debt Carl owed anyone. He had not confronted Carl. He had not fired him. He had allowed Carl to continue believing his operation was invisible because a known spy is infinitely more useful than a discovered one. Every piece of misinformation Carl had passed along in those 11 days had been precisely and deliberately placed for him to find. The layout of the service tunnels Carl had provided to Rinaldi's team was real. But the schedule Carl had given them for the counting room was wrong by 40 minutes in a direction that served Dean Martin perfectly. When Rinaldi's men reached the counting room expecting to find it unguarded and accessible, they found it locked and occupied. When they reached the service exit they'd been told would be clear, there were 3 men waiting there who were not friendly, and Carl Brewer, in the security office watching monitors that were only showing him what Dean had decided he should see, was the last person to build and understand that the entire operation had been run backward from the moment Rinaldi walked through the door. The trap had been set before the first card was dealt. Chapter 5, The High-Tension Dinner. The casino's premier restaurant, the Garden Room, seated 40 at full capacity and was currently serving 12. At a center table, beneath a chandelier that cost more than most American automobiles, Marco Rinaldi sat across from Dean Martin and ate a steak he did not want. This had been explained to Rinaldi rather than suggested. One of Dean's men had appeared at his elbow in the corridor and communicated, with a particular efficiency of a person who says a great deal while saying very little, that Mr. Martin would appreciate his company for dinner. The alternative to appreciating this had not been articulated. It didn't need to be. The geometry of the evening had made it self-evident. Rinaldi had ordered the steak because it was the first thing on the menu. Dean had ordered the same, with quiet, genuine interest in the preparation. For the first 3 minutes, Dean talked about the steak. He talked about the particular quality of Nevada beef. He talked about the correct internal temperature for a proper medium rare and his personal preference for the way the Sands kitchen prepared its sauce. He talked about this with complete sincerity, cutting his steak into methodical squares, completely at ease in a way that only men who are completely in control can afford to be completely at ease. Rinaldi's hands were not entirely steady. "I want to talk about what happened this evening," Dean said, without changing his tone in any direction. He could have been continuing the conversation about beef. "Specifically, I want to talk about what you did to my friend." "Your friend had something that belongs to—" "I'm going to stop you there," Dean said, pleasantly, cutting another square, "because I didn't ask you a question yet. When I ask you a question, I'd like an answer, but I didn't ask one." He lifted the fork, sat down again. "What you did to Judy Garland in that room tonight, in front of everyone, in this building, I want you to sit with that. I want you to think about what you did, and I want you to tell me why you believe that was something you were permitted to do." Rinaldi said nothing. Under the table, the weight against his knee was a gentle but unmistakable reminder of the nature of this dinner. "I've been in this city a long time," Dean continued. "I've watched men come through here who believed that the size of their bankroll or the length of their reach gave them particular license. That license, as I understand it, covers a great many things. What it does not cover, what it has never covered and will not cover while I have any relationship with this establishment, is the right to put your hands on a woman in my house." He lifted his wine glass, took a slow, considered sip. "Now, you're going to finish your dinner, because it's a very good steak, and it would be a shame to waste it. And then we're going to have a longer conversation. And I want you to spend the next 20 minutes while we eat, deciding what kind of man you intend to be when that conversation is over." Rinaldi ate. Dean Martin watched him eat with the patient attentiveness of a man who had all the time in the world and every card in the deck. It was the longest dinner of Rinaldi's life. Chapter 6, The Secret Auction in the Coded Song. The second floor of the Sands, on certain evenings, hosted events that did not appear in any printed schedule. The room was called the Sterling Lounge, and it could accommodate 60 people with enough discretion to make 60 people feel like they were the only ones who knew it existed. Tonight, it was hosting 42, and they were bidding on things that would not bear too close an examination of their provenance. Judy Garland had not planned to perform tonight. She had a booking for the main stage the following evening, and this was supposed to be a private night, a quiet night, a night for cards and the specific anonymity that Las Vegas could provide when you needed it. None of those plans had survived contact with the evening, but she had been moved upstairs to a second service route, installed in the Sterling Lounge through a performer's entrance at the back, and given precisely 90 seconds to absorb the situation before a man in a tuxedo who worked for Dean Martin smiled at her and said, quietly, "We need 4 minutes, Miss Garland." Judy looked at the room. She looked at the man. She straightened the strap of her dress where it had shifted during the corridor run. She looked at the small stage with the upright piano in the corner and the microphone on its stand. For minutes, she confirmed. She walked to the microphone the way she always walked to microphones, like she'd been headed there her whole life and had simply taken a scenic route. The room noticed her immediately, because rooms always notice her, because that was one of the things Judy Garland did to rooms without effort or intention. 42 men in expensive suits stopped their bidding and turned. She smiled. She nodded to the piano player, who, to his credit, was a kind of musician who could follow anyone anywhere without warning. She began to sing. The song she chose was The Man That Got Away, because it was what she knew best, and because under pressure her instincts were reliable in a way that planning never quite achieved. But within the song, within the phrases, woven into the timing of the lyrics, embedded in the pauses, and the particular emphasis she placed on certain syllables, she was doing something else. She was communicating. Dean's man, standing at the back of the room, heard the third verse. He heard the pause she placed before a particular word that rhymed with a location. He heard the beat she added where there was no beat in the original arrangement. He took out a small notebook. He wrote something down. He left the room. Judy sang the fourth verse clean, the way it was written, full voice, absolutely genuine, giving them everything she had. Because if you're going to use a song as cover, you might as well sing it properly. The applause when she finished was the kind that happens when people forget they're being impressed and simply respond. She nodded once, left the stage, and went to find a place to sit and wait for this extraordinary night to resolve itself. Chapter 7. The Bell Tower, Rain and Blood. The roof of the Sands was not a destination. It was infrastructure, maintenance access, the housing for mechanical systems, the base structures for the massive neon signs that turned the Vegas night into perpetual artificial noon. It smelled of tar and electricity and the particular altitude of desert air at 2 a.m. Nobody went up there except people with specific reasons to be there, and the reasons were almost never good. Rinaldi's remaining man, the one who hadn't been collected downstairs, the one who had moved fastest and most independently when the evening began unraveling, had made it to the roof through the maintenance stairwell with the microfilm case in his jacket and the very specific intention of reaching the service hatch that connected to an adjacent building and therefore to an exit that remained outside Dean Martin's control. Dean reached the roof 40 seconds behind him. This was where the public version of Dean Martin, the smooth one, the one with the glass in his hand and the easy smile, the one who sang That's Amore with enough warmth to heat a city block, gave way to something considerably less decorative. He had grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, which was not a city that produced soft men. He had spent years before fame in rooms where softness was a liability. He retained certain capabilities that his professional persona carefully and completely obscured. The man with the microfilm case was fast and desperate, which is its own kind of dangerous. He made it 20 feet toward the maintenance hatch before Dean closed the gap, and what followed on the gravel surface of the Sands rooftop, beneath the massive red and blue pulse of neon signs that bled their colors across everything in the rain that had arrived without warning, was not elegant. It was effective. The rain came down in sheets, washing the gravel clean of whatever the evening had deposited on it. The neon light turned the whole world red, then blue, then red again in its mindless rotation. Dean moved with a practical economy that had nothing to do with performance, and when it was finished, the microfilm case was in his jacket, and the man was sitting against the base of a neon sign housing in a way that suggested he was going to be sitting there for some time. Dean straightened his jacket, smooth as lapels, ran a hand through his hair, which the rain had arranged with no concern for aesthetics. He looked at the city spread below him, all light and noise and the complete indifference of a place that had seen everything and remembered nothing. Then he went back inside. Chapter 8. The Kneeling. The royal suite overlooked Las Vegas from a height that made the whole city look like a jewel box, beautiful and contained, and arranged specifically for someone's pleasure. It was the finest room in the hotel, which meant it was among the finest rooms in the city that ran on the concept of finest. And it was, on this particular night, the room where Marco Rinaldi finally understood the totality of his situation. He had been brought up after dinner, escorted, which was not the same as forced, though the distinction was technical. The room was quiet. The The city hummed below the glass. Dean Martin stood near the window with his jacket open and his tie loosened by 1 degree, holding the microfilm case in one hand with the casualness of a man holding something he picked up off a counter. Rinaldi sat in a chair that had been positioned, without any apparent deliberation, in the center of the room, equidistant from every wall. The positioning was deliberate. Everything about this room this evening had been deliberate from the first moment. "I want to explain something to you," Dean said, without turning from the window, not as a threat, as a factual account of the situation as it currently exists. He turned. His eyes were the kind of calm that is only possible when a man has complete information and knows he has complete information. "Carl Brewer has been in a conversation with my associates for the past 40 minutes. The 2 men you sent through the service tunnels have been retrieved. The man on the roof is presumably still on the roof. The microfilm, which you came here to recover, is in my hand. The names on this film have been copied and are presently in 3 separate locations, 2 of which are not in this building." Rinaldi said nothing. There was nothing strategically useful to say. "What I need from you," Dean said, "is simple, and then you can go. You can leave Las Vegas tonight. You can return to whatever city employs you, and you can explain to the people who sent you whatever explanation suits you best. I don't care about your explanation. I care about one thing." He crossed the room. He stood in front of Rinaldi with the microfilm case still in his hand, looking at a man who had arrived in the city believing himself to be powerful and was now learning that power is always relative and the relativity is always situational. "Stand up," Dean said. Rinaldi stood. "Now we're going downstairs." Dean said, "You're going to walk back into that casino floor, and you're going to find Judy Garland, and you're going to apologize to her. Not quietly, not in a corner, in the room where you hit her, in front of the people who saw you do it. And you're going to mean it, or at least you're going to produce something sufficiently convincing that she finds it acceptable, because she's the one who decides whether it's enough. Not me." Rinaldi's jaw moved. "And if I refuse?" Dean looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the city outside the glass was almost louder. "Then every name on this film goes to every journalist I know, and I know quite a few, by morning. And I make sure that your name is the one that appears in the first paragraph of every story as the man who lost it." He paused. "The people whose names are on this film will want to have a conversation with you about that. I imagine that conversation will be considerably less comfortable than the one we're having now." They went downstairs. The casino floor was still occupied. It was Las Vegas, which kept its own relationship with conventional hours. The tables were running. The jazz was floating. The cocktail waitresses moved through the light the way they always did, graceful and tireless. Judy was seated near the bar, a glass of water in front of her, and the particular composure of a woman who has been through too much tonight to waste energy pretending otherwise. She looked up when she heard them coming. She looked at Dean first, with a question in her face. He answered it with a slight nod. She looked at Rinaldi. Rinaldi stood in the middle of the floor, in the room where he had struck her 3 hours ago, and he said the words. He said in the way a man says words he's been structurally forced to say, without warmth, without genuine contrition, but with enough volume that the people nearby could hear, and with enough specificity that the apology was not general but particular. He had struck her. It was wrong. He was sorry. Judy listened to the end of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her evening bag and removed a single gold casino chip, $100, which in 1963 was not a trivial sum, and held out to him. Rinaldi stared at it. "Take it," she said. Her voice was even and cool and entirely without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. "Maybe next time you can buy yourself some dignity." He took the chip. He left. And he did not return to Las Vegas, which is a fact that anyone who knew the Sands in those years will confirm without hesitation if you ask. Chapter 9. The final twist, the empty film. They found a quiet corner of the bar after it was over, Dean and Judy, and they sat with their drinks in particular companionable silence of people who have been through something together and don't yet need to name it. The casino floor moved around them. The jazz continued. Las Vegas, indifferent as ever, continued the perpetual business of being Las Vegas. After a while, Judy leaned toward him. She said something quietly, close enough that only he could hear it. Dean looked at her. He looked at the microfilm case in his jacket pocket. He took it out and turned it over in his hands. Then he sat on the bar and looked at it with an expression that moved through several things before arriving somewhere that might have been admiration. "Empty," he said. "Not a question." She lifted her glass. "The real one has been in the mail since Tuesday, to 4 separate recipients. A newspaper in New York, a federal attorney in Washington, and 2 others I'll tell you about if we're ever somewhere that isn't here." She took a sip. "The lighter Rinaldi's man took from my purse had a decoy. I made the switch in the ladies' room when I first arrived. Before I sat down, I knew they'd try to take it, so I let them take the wrong one." Dean was quiet for a moment. "You knew they were coming," he said. "I knew someone was coming. I didn't know when or how or exactly what form it would take." She set her glass down. "I knew that if I could get the film delivered and then create enough confusion to expose who in your organization was working against you, both problems would be solved at once. Rinaldi trying to recover something worthless in public is considerably more useful than Rinaldi quietly retrieving the real thing and disappearing." She looked at him steadily. "Carl Brewer's name is in the documentation, by the way. He'll be mentioned in the 3rd paragraph of the Washington story." Dean Martin sat at a bar in the Sands Hotel at 3 o'clock in the morning and looked at Judy Garland with an expression that was, for perhaps the first time that evening, entirely unguarded. "You walked into that punch," he said. She was quiet. "You sat at the table knowing he'd try something. You let him make the move." It wasn't an accusation. It was understanding arriving. "I needed witnesses," she said simply. "I needed it to happen in public, with enough people watching to make the story impossible to suppress. I needed you to lock the doors and expose his operation here before he could leave the building. And I needed you to do it the way you do things, completely and without leaving loose ends." She looked at her glass. "I couldn't exactly explain all that in advance." "No," Dean agreed. "I suppose you couldn't." He picked up the microfilm case. He looked at it. Then he set it back down on the bar with the careful deliberateness of a man completing a thought. "Hell of a plan," he said. "Hell of a night," she replied. Outside, the first gray thread of dawn was beginning to separate itself from the darkness at the edge of the Nevada desert. The way mornings always eventually separate themselves from the nights they follow, regardless of what those nights contained. Las Vegas continued to glow against it, defiant and brilliant and completely itself. Inside the bar, Dean Martin ordered 2 more drinks. He and Judy Garland sat in the quiet and watched the light begin to change. And somewhere in the bones of the city, in the corridors and the counting rooms and the rooftops still damp with recent rain, a new story was settling into the structure of the place. The kind of story that gets told in stages, in pieces, in a way that the best Las Vegas stories always travel. Quietly at first, then louder, until eventually they're just part of what everyone knows happened here in the Sands. On a night when a woman everyone underestimated saved a city that would never quite know what it owed her, fade to dawn.